Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. And for my continued followers, I want to thank you. And we are here in a beautiful, glorious day here in St. Louis, Missouri. The Mardi Gras parade is today down in Soulard for those who are from St. Louis that are listening to my video. So there are tons of people down in Soulard enjoying the festivities for the Mardi Gras season. Man, but I got to tell you about this one. This is not a very good situation that took place in Columbus, Ohio a few years ago with, unfortunately, a white police officer, white sheriff, and a black civilian. And of course, we know how that goes. Sometimes the white sheriff killed a black civilian. And now the trial is taking place as we speak. It took place about 3 years ago, and now the trial is taking place. So let me tell you about it. 6 shots in the back for the murder trial, which opens in a police shooting death of Casey Goodson Jr. Opening statements began on Wednesday in the trial of a former sheriff's deputy charged in the 2020 fatal shooting of 23-year-old black man who was entering his grandmother's house in Columbus, Ohio. The trial begins more than 3 years after Casey Goodson's death. Officer or Sheriff Jason Meade, a former deputy with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, was charged with murder and reckless homicide in December of 2021 in connection with the shooting. Sheriff Meade, who is white, has pleaded not guilty to the charges. Six shots in the back. Special Prosecutor Gary Schroyer said in his opening statement Wednesday, all fired by the defendant into the back of Casey Goodson with no reasonable basis for the defendant to perceive a threat by Casey. It's an unjustified shooting. Casey Goodson Jr. was only 23 years old at the time the defendant killed him. Sheriff Meade was a Franklin County deputy at the time of Casey's death. Is a tremendous loss to his family. Defense attorney for Mr. Meade, attorney Caitlin Stevens, said in her opening statement, now with the benefit of hindsight, nobody here in this courtroom is disputing how tragic the events were on December 4th, 2020. And it is not lost on us that somebody lost a life. Somebody lost a son, a brother, and a friend. Addressing the jury, Mrs. Stevens asked that you remind yourself of that instruction that the judge gave you, that as you took that oath as a juror, you are not to consider sympathy or empathy when you analyze this case. And so every time they play it, remind yourself of what the law requires, not your emotional content. On December 4th, and this is how this thing played out. On December 4th, 2020, Meade was working with the U.S. Marshals Task Force searching for a wanted fugitive when he claims he saw Casey Goodson Jr. waving a gun erratically from inside his car and then began tracking Meade. So he's waving his gun at Sheriff Meade, and then he starts tracking him, according to a December 2021 statement from Sheriff Meade's lawyers. The former deputy claims he then followed Goodson home. So I thought Goodson was tracking him, and now he's tracking Goodson. Sheriff Meade alleges that Casey Goodson had a pistol in his right hand and a plastic bag in his left hand as he stood outside the door of his grandmother's house where he lived. Sheriff Meade said he screamed at Casey Goodson several times to show his hands, but his commands were ignored, according to his attorney's statement. When Goodson eventually turned to face the former deputy. Meade alleges that Goodson pointed the barrel of a gun in Meade's direction, so the deputy fired his weapon. Now, remember that piece. He said that Goodson turned and pointed a gun at Sheriff Meade. Police said a gun was found at the scene, but Goodson's family said he was a legal gun owner. Goodson's family claims he was returning from a dentist appointment, carrying a Subway sandwich, and was wearing AirPods when Meade approached him and didn't hear the officer's command. That can happen. People wear AirPods all the time. I don't think it's a good thing, especially women that are running. You having those things in your ear, you got to pay attention to your surroundings. Women have been sexually assaulted. And I think you should, when you're out and about with all the chaos and disruption that's taking place all throughout our country, you got to utilize the five senses that God gave you, and hearing is one of them. So he didn't hear the officer's command. Because Franklin County Sheriff's Task Force officers are not issued body cameras, no video of the incident exists. An autopsy report by the Franklin County Coroner's Office said Franklin County Sheriff shot him. Casey Goodson's body goes to the Franklin County Coroner's Office, which they're all working for the same folks. Said that Casey Goodson had been shot 5 times in the back and 6 times in total. Now, how could he have been shot in the back when earlier Sheriff Meade said that Goodson turned around and pointed a gun at him? Remember that. Nearly a year after the fatal shooting on December 2nd, 2021, a grand jury announced that they had found enough evidence to charge Meade with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of reckless homicide in the shooting death of Mr. Goodson. Officer Meade subsequently retired after 17 years with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. In June of 2021, Meade had been on administrative leave since the shooting. Now, what does all of that say? So Sheriff Meade said that Casey Goodson turned around and pointed a gun at him, but the coroner's office shows the scientific evidence that Casey Goodson was shot 5 times in the back, right at his grandmother's house, and that he did have a gun. It was in his holster, and he had 3 Subway sandwiches in one hand, and there was no gun in the other hand. So this takes us back to Black Lives Matter and the Mike Brown case in St. Louis that tipped off the whole Black Lives Matter movement, where a white officer has committed this crime, so to speak, or this assault on this young black civilian, resulting in Casey Goodson's death. He was not a harm to the officer, and the actual warrant that they were looking for this person was not even Casey Goodson. They were looking for somebody else, the U.S. Marshal warrant that Officer Meade was canvassing. So Casey Goodson had nothing to do with what Officer Meade's job was for that day, and this kid ends up deceased. I do think, in defense of Black Lives Matter, I'm not a proponent of Black Lives Matter, but that we see way too many scenarios where white officers are killing black civilians, especially young ones. I can't think of one case, and I'm sure there are, where black officers are killing young white males and seeing them as a threat. I'm not in favor of defunding the police, not one bit, but here is an egregious scenario where this white sheriff ended up killing this young black guy for looks like no apparent reason. So he's on trial for murder. The case is actively taking place. You can take a look at it on Court TV. We got to live in a better society with the police officers. We need to have a better relationship with the police force and our urban city folks. We are reaching a point, and we're at a point through all our urban cities where the black community has a fear and a distrust with our law enforcement officials. And we have to find some way to bridge that gap. St. Louis is down about 450 cops. New York had 2,500 police officers leave the force before retirement last year. Chicago is down 1,000 police officers. I think police officers are not paid enough. They're not appreciated. However, in saying that, as an African American or black man in his mid-50s, once you try to provide support for the police force and being black, many of my black counterparts would call me a sellout or an Uncle Tom, which I'm not, or super conservative. I think policing is a viable unit for our public safety. But when we have circumstances like this where Officer Meade made a rush to judgment and shoots and kills Casey Goodson, 23 years old, right at the doorstep of his grandmother's house with his grandmother inside there, and he was posing no threat to anyone, and shoots him 5 times in the back, I think the evidence speaks for itself. And what it does, again, like the Mike Brown situation and or the George Floyd, it creates a wider gap for the disdain, the racial divide between black and white, the authority divide between white police officers and black civilians. Everybody is in a hypersensitive state when the United States of America has allowed all of these guns to be on the streets with open carry and all of this other stuff. I don't see why a 23-year-old would have to be carrying a gun. To me, at 23, you should be in college, going to trade school, going to work, and none of those places require for you to have a weapon. And I do know that some of my listeners are going to say, well, depending on where you live, I have to protect myself. I do fully understand that. But 95% of urban gun violence, murders, and crimes are targeted. If you're not bothering anybody, most people are not going to bother you. If you're going to work, coming home, have a family, going to the subway place, going to the dentist and going home, I don't think Goodson needed a gun to take to the dentist's office. And I've always been the person that if I'm going to a friend's house or going somewhere, if I need to bring a gun, then it's probably a place that I don't need to be. However, Goodson does not deserve to die because he had a license to carry a weapon, and it sounds like he did not burnish this weapon in front of Officer Meade or Sheriff Meade. And Sheriff Meade made a racial, stereotypical judgment call. And it almost seems like he went after this guy thinking that he looked suspicious. And he ended up killing him. And now he is jeopardizing his retirement. And now he's jeopardizing his freedom. Meade, based on this scenario, he went from protecting the citizenry of America as a sheriff or a police officer and going to get criminals to now he has committed a crime, which is counterintuitive to his shield. And now he is facing possible life in prison in the state of Ohio. Look at the dichotomy and the hypocrisy and all of that. And this may boil down to just a racial dynamic. Sheriff Meade looked at this young black man, Casey Goodson Jr., and felt that today is the day I'm going to bother or arrest this gentleman. And it went awry, and he ended up shooting Casey Goodson 5 times in the back. I'm just throwing it out there, give you some food for thought. Tell me what you think. This has been the Trevor Donald Experience. Live your life in a positive, constructive, righteous, and God-fearing way. And remember The Tin Man by Tracy Chapman. See you next time.